very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you guys on something that is really close to my heart. For some of you who've been students of mine, you know that gender-based violence is something that God has brought into my worldview perspective in learning how to care for my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ and those who are not yet my brothers and sisters in Christ. Today I take a little bit of pause because I feel that we are really at the brink here at Biola of really trying to understand what it is that God has in his heart when it comes to injustice and inequality. And I think about our situation this past week. We learned about this hateful incident. And I think about this week that we've dedicated to eradicating injustice when it comes to gender-based violence, sexual assault, and sexual violence. As I've been praying over the past few months about what I would be presenting today, I was drawn over and over again to a particular story in the Old Testament about Dinah. And this weekend, as I was reflecting on what I would be bringing to you guys today, I realized what a strong connection that Dinah has with all issues of injustice and inequality. And while I'm going to be focusing today on gender-based violence, I would like you to keep in the back of your mind the incident that we're coming out of and the pain that we're coming out of as a community in this awful incident. I want to share with you guys why I even started to care about this in the first place. I think it's a journey for all of us to recognize that God gives us certain passions in our life, and they will, over time, align with certain movements that might be happening in our culture. But for me, this particular topic took quite a big journey from being a survivor of a violent rape attack to working with all kinds of women and young men who are survivors of sexual violence and sexual assaults. As Dr. Corey indicated at the beginning, sexual assaults and sexual violence are any kind of sexual advance, sexual touch, anything that is unwanted by the victimized party. So it's kind of clear that there's an injustice or inequality that's occurring within these kinds of acts. And I want to share with you guys my journey. So my journey actually started when I was fortunate enough to be able to be involved in the parliament in Rwanda had a summer-long campaign against gender-based violence in their country. Kind of a unique situation there where they have over 50% of the parliament is actually women, which represents the actual population. So they have really good population representation in the country. And for some of you, you may not be aware that they are the most recent massive genocide that we've seen in the world in our last 20, 30 years. So I had been invited to come and take part in a few different activities during that time. But there's one of them that stood out to me that actually God used to kind of propel me even more into caring about this topic. I was able to go with another MFT from my church, and we were joining a local group, community group. So it was a Rwandan woman who was organizing through another organization women who had been victims of genocidal rape or conflict rape or just rape in general. And we also had opened it up to women who were experiencing all kinds of like domestic violence or violence against women just because they're women. When I showed up into this area, I was actually aware of some of the reputation that they had there. This is Lake Kivu. It's on the western side of Rwanda, and it's directly next to DRC, Congo. And that particular area had been reported as the rape capital of the world. So I'm going to give you guys a few statistics. Walking into there in 2010, I had learned that in 1 year, over 433,785 rapes had occurred within 1 year in this area. which breaks down to roughly 1,152 rapes per day, which also breaks down to 48 rapes occurring each hour. And most of the victims were around the Lake Kivu area that we were going to be speaking to. Another report came out by Caritas Hospital Group in 2009 and gave some statistics based on their hospital reports and what they were seeing in their hospital there around Goma. And they had reported that 749 women had come in a 6-month period and reported that they had been victims of rape. 61% of these women came in, had been displaced from camps. There was a lot of conflict going on in certain areas around there, and so a lot of families were running and trying to find a safe location. What was really interesting to me, which kind of went against a lot of our ideas about rape culture, was that 87% of those 947 women reported that the rapes happened during the day. We oftentimes think that these are just occurring at night, dark moments of the night. And the other thing, consistent with statistics that we see in the United States, 80% of these women took more than a month to report it. So if we can think about how much guts it would take to actually report that in a conflict-torn area, I'm sure that it's even lower than 13%. So I can't even imagine how many more women and young men were affected by this during that period of time. And finally, the Journal of American Medical Association in 2010 said that 39.7% of women in the area that I was in had been exposed to sexual violence, most commonly taking its form in rape. Another study was in 2010 found that 2 in 5 women living in the eastern region had been victims of sexual violence. I'm preparing for my time there and speaking with these women, I started to realize that there's actually kind of a strong correlation or a strong similarity actually between the statistics that I was reading and how many women would be affected and the statistics that I was hearing about the United States. Having not been in a conflict within our own country on the scale of a genocide or a civil war, it was a little shocking to me to realize how similar these statistics were. Today, Dr. Corey had announced that we know that in the time and during college that there's going to be at least 1 in 6 of you will be a victim of sexual violence as women, and 1 in 16 of you will be a victim of sexual violence as men. One of the women that was there, I just want to share with you a little bit of her story. Her name was Anna. And this woman God used very, very strongly in my life to help me to try to come to grips with why I should care about this and why, as a community of believers, we weren't. This woman shared her story. I'm going to call her Anna. And she said that when she was very young, she never felt the love of her family. She felt very overlooked. Her father had multiple wives, and she felt that her mother was one of the lesser loved of the wives. As she shared her story and continued in her story, I got to learn that on top of not feeling loved, when she became of age to where she should be married out, dowry should be offered, nothing happened. And so another year passed the time that she should have received some sort of wedding, marriage invitation, and still nothing happened. And so her father became concerned with the family economy. And what that meant was that he decided that he needed to talk with one of her older brothers, and they hatched a plan together that it would be more economical to kill her than to allow her to stay alive. So as the older brother started to think about the ways that he could kill her, one of the younger brothers overheard this. And so he ran to some of his friends, and he found out one of his friends was at the age of getting married as well, and he talked him into his sister and told him what was going to happen, and so he agreed to marry her and came to her father with a very humble dowry. Well, father obviously accepted this, and the plan to kill her was off, and they set the date for the wedding. And the date was April 7th, 1994. So she prepared for her wedding. Little did she know that the same day of her wedding would be the first day of the Rwandan genocide. And that morning, as she woke up to screams and yells, instead of being excited about her wedding, she was concerned for her life. So she and a couple friends started to run out into the forest and realize what was going on and the scope of what was happening. And they decided that they were going to make their way towards the Ugandan border. So as they left the main area of the city, they kept running, and they ran right into a militia group. She shared that, and she wouldn't give the numbers of how many, that she was gang raped for several days, over and over and over again. They used a machete to cut on her, to keep her in submission, and then they built a shallow grave and buried her in that and left her for dead. Anna shared that at that moment she knew that she had to fight for her life, so she pulled herself out of that shallow grave when they left, after having pretended to be dead for a period of time. And she started to think about ways that she could try to escape again. So she went on her journey, this time alone, no friends with her, again trying to make it to the Ugandan border. And as she ran there, she ran again right into another militia group, into which she became what was called, and what she called, the sex wife of the captain of that group. And as horrible and violent as he was towards her, in some small way, she felt a little bit secure because she knew as long as he kept her, she would be alive. So she kept out the rest of the 100 days of this genocide under his care. And when the genocide was finished, she went back to the area that she had been from to see if any of her family members had survived. And for several months, no one was there until finally she was told through an old neighbor that the only remaining survivor of her family and her fiance's family was the daughter of the brother that wanted to kill her. So she immediately knew what she needed to do. She told me that she needed to take this child and love her like her own daughter. And I was a little bit astounded because I kept thinking about my own experiences being a survivor of a pretty violent rape situation and thinking, I don't know if I could have the guts that it would take or the love in my heart. How was she not bitter? She responded to me that the sins of her father were not her sins. This started me into a new way of thinking, because as I sat and listened to woman after woman after woman in this conference, in this area that is so conflicted, and realizing that each one of these women, not only is rape inevitable, but they have to teach their daughters that they will be raped as an inevitability as well. And I think, what is going on? Could I be that brave? Could I be like Anna? God used this moment in my life to propel me towards deeper compassion for victims and survivors of sexual assault. And I realized that I actually live in a culture that, while I can never compare my story to this beautiful woman, Anna, I will never face that type of life or death situation in the entirety of my life. But I realized that here at home, we have a huge issue that needs to be eradicated. I started to think about violence towards women in particular, and realizing that the number one way that women are killed is by the hand of someone that they know, and usually an intimate partner. Men that say that they love them. And I realized I was living in a country that refused to talk about our little secret, our little rape culture, the American rape culture, that we've allowed to perpetuate and to go on without resistance. When I talk about rape culture, I want to give you guys kind of a definition for that. That's important for me, because there's a lot of different ideas, and when we see that word, we don't know if it's like a media pop word, is this the word of the week, the phrase of the year? But rape culture basically means that it's okay to blame the victim and allow the perpetrator to victimize because of their position in society. Hopefully you're able to hear that with that going out. So in other words, it means that it's okay to blame the victim for what happened to them and allow the perpetrators to continue to do this because of the position that they hold in our society. You know, one of the things that's even more tragic when I came back to Biola is realizing that our statistics are not that different from secular society. And that even our statistics here at Biola about sexual violence, rape, and sexual assault is really not that different than Cal State Fullerton. And it really made me sad. And, you know, as a sociologist, I want to know why. I want to know why. I want the answer to this. I want to know why our subculture in this society that claims to exist around the love of Jesus, that's commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves, actually is comfortable with this condition in our society that perpetuates the violence towards women and young men, especially sexual violence. As a sociologist, I think, oh, well, I could come up with a theory about that. I'm sure I can come up with a way that we can talk about it. One of the things I've thought about is that instead of leading our country through love and wiping out this kind of evil that we have in our society, that instead we've actually tangled and intermingled some of the American values of rugged individualism and self-servingness, if that's a word, that we've intermingled that with our morality. And we've replaced it with something that's so key and so important that Dr. Corey even said today, that community is being replaced by my own individual pursuits in my faith. It's a tension that we feel in this culture. And so oftentimes, we don't want to talk about these things because we'd have to open up a whole can of worms that we think, let's just keep it in there, nice and push down. We don't have to worry about this stuff. We're all Christians and we all love each other, and we don't want to open that can of worms. But I have to tell you, as a believer, this is a more important topic. So I realize I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna get to it. What does the Bible say about this? What does the Bible say about rape and rape culture? I'm going to share with you guys in Genesis 34 the story of Dinah and just unpack that as I can, and then apply that to what I was sharing with you earlier today. One day, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some young women who lived in the area. I'm reading from the New Living Translation right now. I want us to just pause for a second because a lot of you have already taken Old Testament history and lit. So you understand that Leah was not Jacob's most beloved wife. In fact, the Bible is very clear in stating that he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. I can't even imagine as a daughter what that would feel like to be the only daughter that he has of the wife that he considers the second-class wife. In a lot of ways, that's very reflective of my friend Anna's story. You know, and in thinking about Jacob himself, he kind of had a history of bad discernment. We think about what he had been through as a young man and giving his brother stew when he was hungry for his birthright and tricking his father into giving him his birthright and then marrying the wrong woman and not knowing it till the next morning. A little bad judgment. But as we think about this and think about this only daughter, amongst the 12 sons that he had that became the tribes of Israel, her story is just as important. And we need to pay attention to her story just as much as the story of her brothers and their hand in God's plan in Israel. But when the local prince, Shechem, son of Hamor, Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. But then he fell in love with her. And he tried to win her affection with tender words. And he said to his father, "Get me this young girl. I want to marry her." I want to pause for a second again because the Bible is very clear that he says that he seized her and raped her. So what that means is he wanted to have sex with her and she did not. The Bible's clear. What's even more interesting is that he misinterpreted that rape for love. So he set out to try to make her his wife, even though she clearly was not interested in him, clearly not interested in being the wife of this man. Soon Jacob had heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were out in the fields herding livestock. He said nothing until they returned. So when they returned, I'm just going to jump a little bit, what they believed was, the brothers came together and they said, Shechem had done a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family, something that should never have been done. So I wanted to make sure I understood that. So I looked it up in the New King James Version. And it said, and the men were grieved and very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. A thing ought not to be done. So let me break it down in the King James Version, because I know some of you guys, that's like your go-to. And the men were grieved and they were very wroth, because he was wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to have been done. Clearly, rape should not be done. Should not have been done. Now Jacob, man, he was struggling with this because he wanted position, he wanted a place to call his home, and what ended up happening in the rest of the story is that Shechem went and tried to convince the family, I love this woman. His father went and said, hey, we're going to give you all kinds of land, you can buy it, we'll give you everything. So the brothers were the only ones that really stood up for Dinah. And they said, this isn't right. This is not right. This is not something that should have been done. I'm going to stop for a second because a lot of scholars actually argue that the reason why the brothers were so upset was because it was a non-Israelite or a non-child of God that had violated Dinah. But the next portion of the scripture actually clears that up, because what ends up happening is Levi and Simeon go to the father and the son and say, what you've done is wrong. What needs to happen if you want to take her as a wife is you and all of the people in your community must become circumcised. So then these discussions went on, and they decided, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to be circumcised, and then we can intermingle together and marry and all of this stuff, and then we'll all be happy. So the community of Shechem decided, we're going to go ahead and have this done. And when they were healing from those wounds, Levi and Simeon went ahead of their brothers and killed all the men. Killed them all. Then the other brothers came, and they took stuff, and they basically took ownership of the properties and seized the land. Jacob was pretty upset about that. He was actually very angry about that. And basically, towards the end of this, he's starting to criticize the young men, and he says to them, you've actually brought a whole new conflict to me. You've opened up a can of worms. How many times have we heard that in Christian community? Oh my gosh, I wish she wouldn't have said that in chapel. Man, that's just opening up a can of worms. That swastika was just a joke. Why are you trying to open up a can of worms? That girl who says that my friend did that to her, she's just opening a can of worms. You know what? The response is amazing. Both Levi and Simeon said to him, but why should I let him treat my sister like a prostitute? See, I think the Dinah story shows us the heart of God, and that the reason why we need to pay attention as Christians to this is because it is against God's heart for his daughters and his sons. Because you know what? This isn't just happening to women. Oftentimes we admire cultural icons that we see within our society. I call it the Pepe Le Pew. I don't know if you guys remember that cartoon. Remember that with the skunk? Right? And we laugh because it's kind of funny and cute, and we think, oh my gosh, that's so funny. That poor cat with the white stripes somehow gets painted on its back. And the whole cartoon, we watch Pepe Le Pew running after her, and right? And he holds her and he grabs her and he won't let her go. This is what we believe needs to happen when we're pursuing women. That is not what needs to be happening when we're pursuing a woman. And I will say very quickly here that we need to check how we are pursuing love, because Shechem was wrong. It wasn't love that he was motivated by, it was lust. But he thought it was love. And I will say it to you because you're going to hear this time and time again. When someone says no, it means no. I look at popular culture, I like to look at, music and media and things like that, and I see that people like T-Pain, right, says, hey, she usually don't, but I know that she front, because she already knows what she want. Blame it on the alcohol, right? Many of you know it's wrong, but you put yourself in a position to blame it on the alcohol. You know it's wrong. We're pointing to a cultural ambiguity in this country where we think that when someone says, I don't know if I want to have sex or not, I'm confused, I know I shouldn't, I know that I'm supposed to, that we take it as, oh yeah, okay, she really does want it. And I'm here to tell you that is not correct. That is not part of God's design. And I ask you to be like Simon, be like Levi. Stand up for your sisters. They are not whores. Stand up for your brothers. They are not prostitutes. Don't take advantage of each other because we don't talk about it. And God forgive us for not talking about sex enough and the beautiful thing that God did with that design. The worship that occurs between a man and a woman in marriage. I encourage you this week to take part in all the different things that are offered this week. You are at a university, I know I'm almost done. You are at a university that loves you spiritually, mentally, and physically. And I am proud to be a part of a university that is put together a whole week for you to take advantage of to learn how to not be the Shechem and to learn how to be the Levi and the Simeon. And for those of you who are the Dinah, like me, how to find healing.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.